Picture this, you're standing in your childhood kitchen, holding a crumpled $5 bill while your entire family stares at you like you've just committed the ultimate sin. Your sister calls you selfish, your mother shakes her head in disappointment, and your father mutters about how you've changed since college. All over $5. Five measly dollars that you earned, that belonged to you, that you simply refused to hand over without question. But what they didn't know, what none of us knew at that moment, was that this tiny act of defiance would unlock a secret that had been buried for over a decade. A secret worth more money than any of us had ever imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent light in the break room at Digital Solutions Marketing flickered as I stirred honey into my afternoon tea, watching the golden swirls dissolve into amber. It was Thursday, May 16th, and Columbus was experiencing one of those perfect spring days where the temperature hit exactly 72 degrees and every window in the building was cracked open to let in the fresh air. I had just finished presenting a campaign proposal to 3 potential clients, and for the first time in months I felt genuinely proud of my work. The presentation had gone smoothly, my graphics were clean and professional, and I could see the spark of interest in their eyes when I explained the social media strategy. My phone buzzed against the break room table, and I glanced down to see a text from my sister Jessica. Family dinner Sunday at Mom's. 2 p.m. Don't be late. No please. No question mark, just the assumption that I would drop everything and show up. That was Jessica's way, always had been. She commanded rather than requested, expected rather than hoped. I typed back a simple "I'll be there," and slipped the phone into my purse, already feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach that always appeared before family gatherings. Rebecca Chen appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, secured with what looked like a pencil. She had been my closest friend since starting at Digital Solutions 2 years ago, and she possessed an uncanny ability to read my moods from across the office. "That face tells me you just heard from your family," she said, grabbing a diet soda from the refrigerator. "What's the occasion this time?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. Sunday dinner. The sacred Thompson family tradition where everyone gathers to discuss my life choices and remind me that I'm not contributing enough to the family unit. Rebecca had heard these complaints before, had witnessed the aftermath of family gatherings when I would return to work on Monday mornings looking like I'd been through emotional warfare. She never pushed for details, but she listened, and sometimes that was exactly what I needed. "You know you could always say no," she suggested gently, settling into the chair across from me. Revolutionary concept, I know, but it's been known to work. She was right, of course, but saying no to my family felt like speaking a foreign language I'd never learned. The Thompson family operated on a complex system of guilt, obligation, and unspoken expectations that had been refined over generations. My grandmother Rose had perfected it, my mother Linda had inherited it, and my sister Jessica wielded it like a master craftsman. Friday evening found me at the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop tucked between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique in downtown Riverside. It had become my sanctuary over the past year, a place where I could spread out my laptop, work on personal projects, and think without interruption. The owner, an elderly man named Pete, who always wore suspenders and called everyone kiddo, made the best lavender lattes in Central Ohio. The shop stayed open until 9 on weekends, and by 7:30 most of the afternoon crowd had dispersed, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the gentle hum of the espresso machine. I was reviewing my monthly budget, something I did religiously every 2 weeks, when I noticed an unusual pattern in my spending. Over the past 6 months, I had given my family nearly $800 in small increments. 20 here for Madison's school fundraiser, 50 there when Jessica's car needed new tires, 35 when Mom's prescription wasn't covered by insurance. None of it had been requested dramatically or demanded outright. Instead, it came in the form of casual mentions, sighs during phone calls, and pointed comments about how difficult things were getting for everyone except me. The realization settled in my chest like a stone. $800 was more than my monthly rent. It was a vacation I'd been planning for 2 years, it was the emergency fund I'd been trying to build, it was the down payment for the reliable car I desperately needed. And yet, every time they had asked, I had said yes without hesitation, without question, without even considering whether I could afford it. The pattern was so ingrained, so automatic, that I hadn't even noticed it happening. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that makes everything look washed out and tired. I drove the 30-minute route from my apartment in Columbus to my parents' house in Riverside, windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically against the glass. The house looked exactly as it had during my childhood, a small ranch with brown siding and white trim, positioned on a corner lot that my father took great pride in maintaining. The lawn was perfectly edged, the flower beds were weed-free, and the American flag hung from its designated pole next to the front door. Inside, the familiar sounds and smells enveloped me like a memory made tangible. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, the television tuned to a cooking show that no one was watching, and the faint scent of the vanilla candles my mother burned religiously. Jessica was already there, of course, sitting at the kitchen table with Madison coloring beside her while Tyler scrolled through his phone in the living room. Mom bustled around the kitchen, preparing what looked like enough food to feed a small army, while Dad sat in his designated recliner, reading the Sunday paper with the kind of intense concentration he usually reserved for tax documents. "Emma, perfect timing," Mom said without looking up from the stove. "Can you run to the store and grab a gallon of milk? I forgot to pick one up yesterday." She said it casually, the way someone might comment on the weather, but I recognized the underlying assumption. Emma would go to the store, because Emma always went to the store. Emma would pay for the milk because Emma had a steady job and no children to support. Emma would do it without complaint, because that's what good daughters did. For the first time in my adult life, I hesitated. Actually, I just sat.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Down. Can't Tyler go? Or Jessica could take Madison with her. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, visible and uncomfortable. Jessica looked up from Madison's coloring book with raised eyebrows. Mom paused her stirring, and even Dad lowered his newspaper slightly. "It's just milk, Emma," Jessica said with the tone she usually reserved for Madison when she was being unreasonable. "It'll take you 10 minutes. The implication was clear. Why are you making this difficult? Why are you being stubborn about something so simple? Why are you suddenly acting like this small favor is such an inconvenience?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a $5 bill, placing it gently on the kitchen counter. "Here's money for the milk. I'll stay here and help Mom with dinner." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom stared at the money like it was something foreign and potentially dangerous. Jessica's eyes widened, in what I could only describe as shock mixed with disgust. Tyler looked up from his phone for the first time since I'd arrived, and Dad's newspaper crinkled as his grip tightened. "Keep your money," Mom said quietly, her voice carrying a hurt that seemed disproportionate to the situation. I didn't realize asking my daughter for a simple favor had become such a burden. She moved the bill back toward me with the tip of her finger, as if touching it directly might contaminate her somehow. Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Since when did you become so selfish, Emma? It's $5 and a 10-minute drive. God, college really did change you, didn't it?" Her words hit me like individual slaps, each one designed to sting, to make me feel small and ungrateful and wrong. Madison looked up from her coloring, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, her 8-year-old eyes moving between the adults with confusion. Tyler finally spoke up from the living room, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that he had perfected over the years of family gatherings. "Must be nice to be so successful that $5 is too precious to spend on your own family." He didn't even look up from his phone as he said it, which somehow made it worse. The dismissiveness, the assumption that my hesitation was about money rather than principle, the way he managed to make my education and career sound like character flaws rather than achievements. Dad folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, the kind of methodical movement that I remembered from childhood arguments. "Emma, your mother asked you to do something simple. This isn't the time to make a point." His voice was calm, measured, and completely inflexible. He had spoken, and in the Thompson family hierarchy, that usually ended the discussion. Except this time, something inside me refused to bend. I looked around the kitchen at the faces of my family, all of them staring at me with varying degrees of disappointment and confusion. The $5 bill sat on the counter between us like evidence of my apparent transformation into someone selfish and difficult. "It's not about the money," I said quietly, though I wasn't entirely sure they would understand what it was about. "It's about the fact that every time I come here, I'm expected to pay for something, do something, fix something. When did family time become a list of tasks for me to complete?" Mom's hurt expression shifted slightly towards something that looked like anger. "We don't ask you for much, Emma. You live alone, you have a good job, you don't have the responsibilities that Jessica has. It's not unreasonable to expect you to help out occasionally. The word occasionally hung heavy with irony, given my recent budget review that showed exactly how often these requests had become. Occasionally, I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, scrolling through the past 6 months of transactions. $20 for Madison's school fundraiser in March, $50 for Jessica's car repair in February, $35 for Mom's prescription in January, $40 for Tyler's work boots in December. I read each item aloud, watching their faces change as the list grew longer. That's just the past 4 months, and it doesn't include the grocery runs, the gas money, or the times I picked up dinner for everyone. Jessica crossed her arms defensively. So now you're keeping track. What are you, our accountant? Those weren't demands, Emma. Those were family members helping each other out during difficult times. Her voice rose slightly, and Madison's coloring became more aggressive, her crayon pressing harder against the paper. Family members, I repeated slowly. When was the last time any of you helped me with anything? When was the someone offered to bring me dinner when I was sick, or help me move furniture, or even just asked how I was doing without following up with a request for something. The questions came out more bitter than I had intended. But once they started, I couldn't stop them. Tyler left from the living room, a short bark of amusement that held no warmth. What do you need help with, Emma? You've got everything figured out. Nice apartment, steady job, no kids to worry about. Some of us have real problems. The word real cut deeper than he probably intended. Dismissing my life as somehow less valid, less challenging, less worthy of support, because I had made different choices. Dad stood up from his recliner and walked into the kitchen, his presence immediately changing the dynamic of the room. At 65, he still commanded attention without saying a word, and when he finally spoke, everyone listened. This is getting out of hand. Emma, take your money and go to the store. Everyone else, drop it. We're having a nice family dinner, and this conversation is over. But for the first time in my life, I didn't automatically comply with his directive. Instead, I picked up the $5 bill from the counter and put it back in my purse. No, now, Dad. I'm not going to the store, and I'm not dropping it. This conversation is actually just getting started. The words came out stronger than I felt, but saying them aloud gave them power, made them real in a way that thinking them never had. Mom set down her wooden spoon and turned to face me fully. Her expression a mixture of confusion and disappointment that I had seen many times before, but never directed at me with such intensity. Emma Marie Thompson, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this attitude stops right now. We are your family. We love you, we support you, and occasionally we ask for small favors in return. That's how families work. Is it? I asked, genuinely curious about her definition of support. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm the family ATM with legs. I pay for things, I solve problems, I show up when needed. And in return, I get criticized for not doing enough, not contributing enough, not being grateful enough, for the privilege of being everyone's backup plan. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of something simmering on the stove, and Madison's crayon scratching against paper. Jessica sank back into her chair. Tyler's phone clicking stopped from the living room, and Mom gripped the edge of the counter with both hands. Dad remained standing, his expression unreadable, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. You know what? I continued, surprised by my own courage. I think I'm going to skip dinner today. I need some time to think about what family actually means. I picked up my purse and headed toward the front door, each step feeling both terrifying and liberating. Behind me, I heard Jessica's voice rise in protest, Mom calling my name, and Tyler muttering something about dramatic exit. As I reached for the door handle, Dad's voice stopped me. Emma, don't leave like this. Sit down, let's talk this through like adults. His tone was gentler than before, almost pleading, and for a moment I wavered. The old Emma would have turned around, apologized for making a scene, and quietly accepted whatever role they assigned to her. But the new Emma, the one who had just stood up for herself over $5, kept walking. I'll call you this week, I said without turning around. When everyone's ready to have a real conversation about this. I closed the door behind me and walked to my car, hands shaking slightly as I fumbled with the keys. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of familiar scenery and unfamiliar emotions. I had just done something that felt both completely wrong and absolutely necessary, and I had no idea what came next. Back in my apartment, I sat on my small couch, with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, staring at my phone as it buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from various family. Jessica's texts ranged from angry to hurt, to confused. Mom called twice, leaving voicemails that I wasn't ready to listen to. Even Tyler sent a message, surprisingly, asking if I was okay, and suggesting that maybe everyone had overreacted. But it was a message from an unknown number that caught my attention late that evening. Miss Thompson, this is Mr. Harrison. From Harrison and Associates. I was a friend of your grandmother Rose, and I've been trying to reach your family about some important legal matters. Could you please call me at your earliest convenience? It's regarding your grandmother's estate. The timestamp showed he had sent it 3 hours ago, and I wondered why he was contacting me specifically, rather than my parents. I saved his number and made a mental note to call him on Monday. Grandmother Rose had passed away when I was 16, and as far as I knew, her estate had been settled years ago. She had left the house to my parents, a few pieces of jewelry to Mom and Jessica, and some savings bonds to all the grandchildren. It seemed strange that there would be legal matters still pending after all this time. But then again, legal processes often moved slowly, especially in small towns like Riverside. Sunday evening stretched into Monday morning, and I found myself unable to concentrate on work. The confrontation with my family replayed in my mind like a song stuck on repeat, each harsh word echoing with new meaning. I kept thinking about Tyler's comment about real problems, Jessica's accusation of selfishness, and Mom's hurt expression when I refused to go to the store. Had I overreacted? Was I really being selfish about $5? Or was this about something much bigger? At lunch I finally called Mr. Harrison's office. His secretary, a woman with a warm voice and a slight southern accent, scheduled me for an appointment on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. When I asked what it was regarding, she simply said that Mr. Harrison preferred to discuss estate matters in person, and that it would be worth my time to come in. The mysterious nature of the call only added to my growing sense that my life was shifting in ways I didn't fully understand. Wednesday arrived with the kind of humid heat that made Ohio summers memorable, for all the wrong reasons. I dressed professionally, more out of habit than necessity, and drove to downtown Riverside for my appointment with Mr. Harrison. His office was located in one of the older buildings on Main Street. Two-story brick structure that had probably been elegant in the 1940s and was now struggling to maintain dignity in the face of decades of economic decline. The waiting room was exactly what I expected from a small-town lawyer's office. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that had seen better decades, and the musty smell of old books and older carpet. Mr. Harrison emerged from his inner office precisely in what caused a tall, distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a navy suit that looked expensive, despite its age, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm and warm. Miss Thompson, thank you for coming. I've been trying to track down your family for several months now. He gestured toward his office, and I followed him through a doorway lined with law degrees and certificates that spoke to a long and presumably successful career. His desk was massive, made of dark mahogany, and covered with neat stacks of papers, manila folders, and what appeared to be several official-looking documents. I'd have to admit, I'm curious about why you're contacting me specifically, I said as I settled into the chair across from his desk. My grandmother passed away over 10 years ago, and I thought her estate was settled long ago. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, his expression serious but not unconscious. That's exactly what I need to discuss with you. Your grandmother Rose was a remarkable woman, and she was also my client for over 30 years. What your family doesn't know, what no one knows except for me and the bank, is that Rose established a trust fund in 1995. Shortly after you started high school. He paused, studying my face for a reaction. She was very specific about the terms of this trust, and even more specific about when and how it should be revealed. My heart started beating faster, though I wasn't sure why. A trust fund. She never mentioned anything like that to me. We weren't particularly close, and she lived pretty modestly. I always assumed she didn't have much money beyond the house and her savings account. Mr. Harrison smiled slightly, the expression of someone who had kept an important secret for a very long time and was finally able to share it. Rose was much more financially savvy than anyone realized. She invested wisely, lived frugally, and over the course of several decades, She accumulated a substantial amount of wealth. More importantly, she was an excellent judge of character, and she watched her family very carefully during her final years. He opened one of the folders on his desk and pulled out a document that looked official and intimidating. According to the terms she established, this trust was to remain secret until you reached the age of 20. She wanted to ensure that the beneficiary was someone who understood the value of money, who wouldn't be swayed by family pressure to share inappropriately, and who had demonstrated independence and good judgment. He looked at me over his glasses. Emma, yesterday was your 28th birthday. And based on my observations and inquiries, you meet all of her criteria. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. Mr. Harrison, I think there's been some mistake. My birthday was 3 weeks ago, not yesterday. And I still don't understand what this has to do with me specifically. Don't trust funds usually go to the oldest child, or get divided equally among family members. He consulted the document again, running his finger along what appeared to be handwritten notes in the margin. You're absolutely right about your birthday. My apology. I've been tracking several dates related to this case, but there's no mistake about the beneficiary. Rose was very clear in her instructions. She established this trust specifically for you, Emma Thompson, her youngest granddaughter, with the stipulation that it would only be activated if you demonstrated financial independence and, in her words, the backbone to stand up for yourself when it matters. He paused again, and I could see something that looked like approval in his expression. Mr. Harrison, I'm still not following. How would you even know whether I've demonstrated anything? And what exactly are we talking about in terms of money? A few $1,000s. Enough for a nice vacation. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the whole conversation felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's life. He reached into another folder and pulled out what looked like a bank statement, though I couldn't read the details from where I sat. Emma, I've been monitoring your situation for the past year. As per Rose's instructions, I know about your job, your department, your education, and yes, I know about your family's financial demands. Rose predicted this dynamic very accurately, and she wanted to ensure that, when you finally inherited this money, you would be mature enough and strong enough to handle it appropriately. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the arms of my chair. How much money are we talking about, Mr. Harrison? My voice came out smaller than I intended, almost a whisper. He turned the bank statement around so I could see it clearly. The number at the bottom made my vision blur, and my breath catch in my throat. $1.7 million. Emma, your grandmother Rose left you $1.7 million, and as of today, it's officially yours. I walked out of Mr. Harrison's office in a daze, my legs moving automatically, while my mind struggled to process what had just happened. $1.7 million. The number echoed in my head. I couldn't quite believe it. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the official documents Mr. Harrison had given me, reading and rereading the bank account numbers, as if they might change or disappear if I looked away too long. The trust fund paperwork was thick, formal and filled with legal language that made my head spin. But the essential facts were clear enough. Grandmother Rose had been secretly investing money for decades, building a portfolio that included stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings I never knew existed. She had owned rental properties in 3 different states, had invested in companies that became wildly successful, and had lived like a woman with barely enough to get by, while accumulating wealth that could change someone's entire life. But what struck me most wasn't the money itself. It was the letter Rose had written to accompany the trust documents. Mr. Harrison had handed to me in a sealed envelope, with my name written in her familiar, careful handwriting. I opened it now, sitting in my Honda Civic in a lawyer's parking lot, and read words that felt like they were coming from beyond the grave. My dearest Emma, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have reached your 28th birthday. And more importantly, you have proven yourself to be the woman I always hoped you would become. I have been watching your family for many years, and I have seen patterns that troubled me deeply. I have seen what they take from you without asking, how they expect your generosity without offering their own, and how they mistake your kindness for weakness. But I have also seen your strength, your intelligence, and your refusal to become bitter despite their treatment. This money is not just an inheritance. It is a tool for you to build the life you deserve, free from the obligations and expectations that have been placed on you since childhood. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Rose's observations about family dynamics, her concerns about my parents' financial management. She wrote about watching me work multiple jobs during college while Jessica lived at home rent-free, about noticing how family gatherings always seem to involve requests for my help or money, and about her decision to keep this inheritance secret until I was old enough to handle both the wealth and the family reaction that would inevitably follow. The most important thing you must understand, Rose had written near the end, is that this money comes with no obligations to anyone except yourself. You do not owe your family anything, simply because you now have more than they do. You do not need to fix their problems, fund their dreams, or apologize for your good fortune. This is your chance to live without being everyone else's solution, and I hope you will take it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Rose had understood things about my family that I was only just beginning to recognize myself. She had seen the patterns of manipulation and expectation that I had accepted as normal for so many years. More than that, she had planned for this moment, had anticipated exactly how difficult it would be for me to claim my independence, and had tried to give me the tools to do it successfully. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of familiar streets that suddenly looked different, as if the knowledge of my inheritance had changed the lens through which I saw everything. I kept thinking about the timing of this revelation, coming just days after my confrontation with my family over $5. It felt like the universe was playing an elaborate joke. Or maybe Rose was orchestrating things from wherever she was now, making sure I learned to stand up for myself before I gained access to life-changing money. Back home, I spread the trust documents across my kitchen table and called in sick to work, something I had never done unless I was actually ill. But this felt like an emergency of a different sort, a complete reorganization of everything I thought I knew about my life and my future. I spent the afternoon reading through investment statements, property deeds, and financial projections that painted a picture of wealth I couldn't quite comprehend. The trust wasn't just a lump sum sitting in a bank account. Rose had structured it as a diversified portfolio that generated monthly income while preserving the principal. According to the projections Mr. Harrison had provided, I could expect to receive approximately $12,000 per month in passive income, enough to live comfortably without touching the principal amount. It was more money than I made at my job. Money that will continue flowing whether I worked or not. Money that could fund any dream
I'd ever had and several I'd never dared to imagine. But along with the excitement came a crushing weight of responsibility and fear. What would happen when my family found out? How would Jessica react to learning that her younger sister, the one she'd always seen as the family helper, now had access to more money than any of them would see in their lifetimes? How would my parents handle the knowledge that Rose had chosen me specifically, bypassing them entirely in favor of their youngest daughter? I tried to imagine Sunday dinner conversations where I casually mentioned my newfound wealth, and every scenario I pictured ended in disaster. Jessica would demand her share, insisting that family money should be divided equally. My parents would expect me to pay off their mortgage, fund their retirement, and solve every financial problem they'd ever had. Tyler would suddenly become my best friend, full of investment advice and business opportunities that just happened to require my backing. The $5 incident would seem like a quaint preview of the battles that were coming. That evening, I called Rebecca and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. I needed to tell someone about what had happened, but I also needed advice from someone outside my family circle, someone who could offer perspective without being influenced by the potential for personal gain. We met at the Daily Grind, and I chose a corner table far from other customers where we could talk without being overheard. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Rebecca said as she settled into her chair with a caramel macchiato. "What happened with the lawyer? Was it about your grandmother's estate?" I had mentioned the appointment to her earlier in the week, though I'd downplayed its importance, expecting it to be a minor matter involving forgotten paperwork or unclaimed property. I pulled out the trust documents and slid them across the table to her. Rebecca's eyes widened as she scanned the first page, then widened further as she flipped through the subsequent pages, and began to understand the scope of what I was showing her. "Emma, this is a lot of money. Like life-changing money. How is this possible? Your grandmother lived in a tiny house and drove a car from the 80s. Apparently she was much better with money than anyone realized," I said, keeping my voice low even though the coffee shop was nearly empty. "She invested for decades, owned rental properties, and lived way below her means. But Rebecca, look at this part." I pointed to the section of the trust that outlined the conditions for inheritance. "She specifically chose me. Not my parents, not Jessica, not all of us equally. Just me. And she wrote this letter explaining why." Rebecca read Rose's letter twice, her expression growing more serious with each paragraph. When she finished, she set it down carefully and looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Emma, your grandmother was incredibly wise. She saw exactly what was happening in your family, and she made sure you'd have the resources to break free from it. But she also knew this would cause problems, didn't she? That's why she made you wait until you were old enough to handle the fallout. That's what scares me, I admitted. I can't even get my family to accept me saying no to buying milk without causing a scene. What's going to happen when they find out about this? And do I even have to tell them? Mr. Harrison said the trust is completely private unless I choose to disclose it. The possibility of keeping the inheritance secret was tempting, but I knew it would be nearly impossible to maintain. Changes in my lifestyle, my ability to help with family emergencies, my general attitude toward money, all of it would eventually give me away. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, considering the implications. You could keep it secret for a while, at least until you figure out how you want to handle things. But Emma, think about what your grandmother wrote. She didn't give you this money, so you could continue being the family ATM, just with a bigger account to draw from. She gave it to you so you could build your own life, make your own choices, and stop letting them guilt you into funding their problems. We talked for another hour, discussing practical considerations like financial advisors, tax implications, and investment strategies. But underneath all the technical details was a more fundamental question about identity and family loyalty. Was I obligated to share this windfall with people who had never shown the same generosity toward me? Did blood relations automatically entitle my family to benefit from my good fortune? Or was Rose right that this money came with no obligations except to myself? The next few days passed in a strange state of suspended reality. I went to work, attended meetings, responded to emails, and completed projects as if nothing had changed, while privately I researched financial planners and calculated how long I could afford to take off work if I wanted to. The secret felt enormous, like a physical weight I was carrying around that no one else could see. Every conversation with coworkers became an exercise in self-control as I fought the urge to share my news with someone, anyone, who might understand the magnitude of what had happened. My family, meanwhile, had gone surprisingly quiet after our Sunday confrontation. Usually, family disputes resulted in a flurry of phone calls, text messages, and attempted mediation by various relatives who felt compelled to weigh in on the situation. But this time, there was only silence. No apologies, no attempts to explain their behavior, no invitations to come back and work things out. It was as if they had decided that if I wanted to be difficult about $5, they would simply proceed without me. The silence was both liberating and hurtful. On one hand, it confirmed what Rose had written in her letter about my family's tendency to take my presence and contributions for granted. They were apparently willing to write me off entirely rather than acknowledge that their behavior might have been unreasonable. On the other hand, despite everything that had happened, these were still the people who had raised me, who knew me before I became financially successful, who had been constants in my life for 28 years. On Thursday evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Jessica directly, something I rarely did without a specific reason or family obligation driving the conversation. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious and slightly cold. Emma, I wasn't sure I'd hear from you again after your dramatic exit on Sunday. I wanted to talk about what happened, I said, settling onto my couch with a cup of tea. I think there are some things we need to clear up, and I'd rather do it honestly than let this fester. There was a long pause on Jessica's end, and I could hear Madison chattering in the background, probably demanding attention or snacks or help with homework. Honestly? Okay, let's be honest. You've changed, Emma. Ever since you got that fancy job and moved to your own place, you've acted like you're better than the rest of us. Sunday was just the final proof that you care more about being right than you care about family. Jessica's words stung, but they also revealed something important about how she viewed our relationship and my role within the family structure. Jessica, can I ask you something? When was the last time you helped me with anything? Not money, not favors, just basic emotional support or practical help. The question seemed to catch her off guard, and the silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. That's not fair, she said finally. You don't need help the way the rest of us do. You're single, you have a good job, you don't have kids to worry about. Your problems aren't the same as real family problems. There was that word again.
Real, as if my concerns, my struggles, my need for support were somehow less valid because I had made different life choices. So my problems don't count because I'm not married with children. My stress doesn't matter because I have a steady income. Jessica, do you realize that you've never once asked me how I'm doing without following it up with a request for something? I tried to keep my voice level, but I could feel frustration bleeding through despite my best efforts. Oh please. You're being ridiculous. We're family, Emma. Family helps each other out. That's what families do. Just because you've decided to keep score doesn't mean the rest of us have to play along with your new rules. Jessica's tone had shifted from defensive to dismissive, and I could picture her rolling her eyes the way she used to when we were teenagers arguing over chores or curfews. It's not about keeping score, I said, it's about reciprocity. It's about feeling like I matter to you for reasons beyond what I can provide. When you call me Jessica, it's because you need something. When you invite me to family gatherings, it's because you need an extra pair of hands or someone to split the cost of groceries. When do you call just to see how I'm doing? When do you invite me over just because you enjoy my company? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I already knew the answer. Jessica called when she needed a babysitter, when money was tight, when Tyler was stressed about work, and she needed someone to vent to about his mood. She invited me to family events because I was reliable, because I brought good food and didn't complain about helping with cleanup, because I could be counted on to entertain Madison when the adults wanted to talk. But when had she last called just to chat? When had she last suggested we spend time together for no reason beyond sisterly bonding? You know what, Emma, if that's how you really feel, maybe it's better if you stay away for a while. Maybe you need some time to figure out what family actually means before you start lecturing the rest of us about it. Jessica's voice had turned cold, final, the tone she used when she'd made up her mind about something and wouldn't be swayed by further discussion. Maybe I do, I agreed quietly. Maybe we all do. I ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of my apartment, feeling both relieved and devastated. The conversation had confirmed many of the things Rose had written in her letter, but knowing I was right didn't make it hurt any less. Over the weekend, I made several decisions that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor that Mr. Harrison had recommended, a woman named Patricia Wells, who specialized in working with sudden wealth recipients. I researched luxury apartments in Columbus and scheduled tours for the following week. I looked into graduate programs in marketing and business administration, dreams I had put on hold for financial reasons that no longer applied. Most importantly, I began planning what I privately called my independence timeline. I would give my current job 2 weeks' notice, not because I disliked the work, but because I wanted the freedom to pursue opportunities without being constrained by financial necessity. I would move to a larger apartment, maybe even buy a condo, in a neighborhood I had always admired, but never thought I could afford. I would travel, take classes, volunteer for causes I cared about, and build a life based on my own interests, rather than my family's expectations. But first I had to decide how and when to tell my family about the inheritance. Rose's letter had been clear about my lack of obligation to share the money, but she hadn't provided guidance about whether to share the information. Part of me wanted to keep it secret indefinitely, to simply live my new life without explaining how it had become possible. But another part of me, the part that still hoped for genuine reconciliation with my family, wanted to give them a chance to prove that they could accept my good fortune without immediately trying to claim a piece of it. Monday morning brought an unexpected call from my father, the first direct communication I'd had with him since the Sunday dinner incident. Dad was not typically one for long phone conversations or emotional discussions, so when his name appeared on my caller ID at 8:30 in the morning, I knew something significant was happening. Emma, we need to talk, he said, without preamble. Can you come by the house this evening? There are some things that need to be settled. His tone was serious but not angry, more like a business meeting than a family reconciliation, and I found myself agreeing to visit before I'd fully considered whether I was ready for another confrontation. What's this about, Dad? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. The family had undoubtedly spent the past week discussing my behavior, analyzing my motivations, and deciding on a unified response to what they saw as my unreasonable demands for equal treatment. We'll talk when you get here, he said simply. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead, and I stared at my phone, wondering if I was walking into an intervention, an ultimatum, or something else entirely.
Whatever they had planned, I knew this conversation would be different from our previous confrontations. I was different now, armed with knowledge and resources that changed the entire dynamic of our relationship. As I prepared for the evening meeting, I made one final decision about the inheritance. I would tell them about the trust fund, but I would also make it clear that Rose's conditions and expectations were going to be honored. This money was not a family windfall to be shared equally, but a personal inheritance with specific intentions behind it. Whether they could accept that reality would determine the future of our relationship, and for the first time in my life, I was prepared to let them make that choice without trying to manage their reaction or minimize their disappointment. The afternoon stretched endlessly as I tried to focus on work while mentally rehearsing various versions of the conversation I would have with my family. I imagined their shock at learning about the money, their anger at discovering Rose had bypassed them entirely, and their inevitable expectations that I would use my newfound wealth to solve their financial problems. But I also imagined, perhaps optimistically, the possibility that they might surprise me with genuine happiness for my good fortune and respect for Rose's decision to trust me with this responsibility. By 5:30, I was sitting in my car outside my parents' house, gathering courage for what felt like the most important conversation of my adult life. The house looked exactly the same as it had the previous Sunday, but everything else had changed. I was no longer the financially dependent daughter who could be guilted into compliance with appeals to family loyalty. I was no longer the automatic solution to everyone else's problems, the person who said yes before she'd even heard the question. I was Emma Thompson, granddaughter of Rose Thompson, inheritor of her wisdom and her wealth, and I was finally ready to live up to both. The front door opened before I could knock, and Mom appeared with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't angry exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. More resigned, like someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary medical procedure. She stepped aside to let me in, and I noticed that the house smelled different somehow, cleaner than usual, as if she had spent the day scrubbing away the tension from our previous encounter. "Everyone's in the living room," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Your father wants to discuss some things with you." Her voice carried a formality that was unusual for our family interactions, and I realized this meeting had been planned with more care than I'd initially understood. This wasn't a spontaneous family discussion, it was an organized intervention. I walked into the living room to find Dad sitting in his usual recliner, but Jessica and Tyler were positioned on the couch in a way that suggested they'd been given specific instructions about where to sit and how to present themselves. Madison was nowhere to be seen, probably sent to a friend's house or upstairs to her room, with strict instructions not to interrupt. The coffee table had been cleared of its usual magazines and remote controls, replaced with a yellow legal pad covered in Dad's careful handwriting. "Sit down, Emma," Dad said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We've been doing some thinking since Sunday, and we need to clear the air about a few things." His tone was measured, almost businesslike, and I could see that he had prepared for this conversation with the same methodical approach he brought to filing taxes or planning home improvement projects. I settled into the designated chair, acutely aware that I was outnumbered, and that they had clearly coordinated their approach to whatever this meeting was supposed to accomplish. Mom took her usual spot on the end of the couch, folding her hands in her lap with the same careful precision she used when posing for family photographs. The silence stretched for several seconds, before Dad consulted his legal pad, and began what was clearly a prepared speech. "We've come to the conclusion that there's been some miscommunication about expectations and responsibilities within this family," he said, reading directly from his notes. "And we think it's important to establish some clearer boundaries about what we can reasonably expect from each other moving forward." His words sounded formal, and rehearsed like he was reading from a corporate policy manual, rather than talking to his daughter. Jessica shifted uncomfortably on the couch, and I could tell she was restraining herself from interrupting with her own version of events. Tyler stared at his hands, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but trapped in a family meeting about emotional dynamics and financial obligations. Mom continued to sit perfectly still, but I noticed her fingers were working against each other in a subtle nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "We recognize that you feel you've been asked to contribute more than your fair share to family needs," Dad continued, still reading from his notes. "And we're willing to acknowledge that perhaps we haven't always been as appreciative as we should have been of your help over the years." The words sounded forced, like a scripted apology written by committee, rather than a genuine expression of understanding or regret. I waited for him to continue, but he seemed to expect some kind of response to his carefully worded pseudo-apology. I appreciate you saying that, Dad, I said carefully. But I get the feeling there's more to this conversation than just acknowledgement of past issues. I could see Jessica fighting to keep her mouth shut, her jaw clenched with the effort of letting Dad lead the discussion according to whatever plan they had developed. You're right, Dad said, consulting his notes again. We also need to discuss your recent behavior, and what it means for the family going forward. Walking out of Sunday dinner, refusing to help with simple requests, keeping track of money you've contributed to family needs. These aren't the actions of someone who understands what family commitment means. His tone had shifted slightly, becoming more authoritative and less conciliatory. And we need to talk about your attitude, Jessica finally burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. This whole victim act, like you're the only one who's ever had to help out family members in need. Do you have any idea how selfish you sound when you complain about buying groceries or helping with Madison's school expenses? Her prepared restraint dissolved completely as she leaned forward, her voice rising with each word. Tyler finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. Look, Emma, we get that you're upset about the money thing. But you have to understand our perspective too. You live alone, you don't have kids, you make good money at a stable job. When we ask for help, it's not because we're trying to take advantage of you. It's because we genuinely need help, and you're in the best position to provide it. His explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but I could hear the underlying assumption that my life was easier, and therefore my resources were more expendable. Mom cleared her throat softly, the signal that she was ready to contribute her perspective to the discussion. Emma, sweetheart, I think you've lost sight of what it means to be part of a family. Families support each other through difficult times. They don't keep score or demand thank you notes for every small kindness. When Jessica was struggling with Tyler's job situation, you helped without being asked. When I needed dental work, you stepped up without hesitation. That's what families do for each other. But when have any of you stepped up for me? I asked, finally voicing the question that had been building in my mind for weeks. When have I been struggling and received support without having to ask for it? When have any of you noticed that I might need help, emotional or otherwise, and offered it freely? The question seemed to catch them off guard, as if the possibility of me needing support had never occurred to them. Dad frowned and consulted his legal pad again, apparently searching for a prepared response to this particular challenge. Emma, you've never indicated that you needed help with anything. You've always seemed to have everything under control. How were we supposed to know you wanted support if you never asked for it? His response revealed exactly the dynamic I was trying to describe. The assumption that support should only flow in one direction, because I appeared capable of handling my own problems. So I have to explicitly ask for the same consideration that you automatically expect from me. I ask. Jessica doesn't have to ask for help with Madison's expenses. You all just assume I'll contribute when she mentions them. Tyler doesn't have to request assistance when he's between jobs. It's just understood that I'll help cover things until he's back on his feet. But if I need emotional support, practical help, or even just someone to check on how I'm doing, I have to specifically request it. Jessica rolled her eyes with theatrical exaggeration. Oh, come on, Emma, what kind of help do you possibly need? You have the perfect life. Good job, nice apartment, no responsibilities except to yourself. What are you struggling with that requires the rest of us to rally around you? Her dismissive tone made it clear that she genuinely couldn't imagine what problems I might face that would warrant family support. Maybe I struggle with feeling like my only value to this family is financial, I said quietly. Maybe I get lonely in my perfect apartment and would appreciate occasional social invitations that don't come with hidden agendas. Maybe I deal with work stress and relationship disappointments and health concerns just like everyone else, but I've learned not to mention them because they're immediately dismissed as less important than everyone else's problems. The room fell silent as my words settled over them. I could see confusion in their faces, as if I had started speaking a foreign language they couldn't quite translate. The idea that I might have emotional needs or personal struggles seemed genuinely surprising to them, which only reinforced the point I was trying to make about our family's lopsided dynamic. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, and finally looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. Emma, if you needed something, why didn't you just say so? We're not mind readers. If you wanted us to ask about your life, or invite you to things, you should have told us that's what you wanted. His response perfectly illustrated the problem. Even when acknowledging my concerns, he was placing the responsibility on me to manage everyone else's behavior, rather than expecting them to be naturally considerate. The fact that I have to ask you to care about my well-being is exactly the problem, I replied. When Jessica is stressed about money, you don't wait for her to request emotional support. You automatically provide it. When Tyler is having work difficulties, you don't expect him to explicitly ask for encouragement. You offer it freely. But when it comes to me, care and consideration are apparently available only by special request. Dad set down his legal pad with visible frustration. Emma, this conversation is going in circles. The bottom line is that families have different roles, and yours has always been to be the stable one, the one others can count on for help when needed. That's not a bad thing, it's actually a compliment to your character and capabilities. We rely on you because we trust you. Because we know you're strong enough to handle whatever life throws at you. But what if I don't want to be the stable one all the time? I asked. What if I want to be the one who's supported occasionally, instead of always being the one providing support? What if I want relationships based on mutual care, rather than one-way dependence? My questions seemed to genuinely puzzle them, as if I were suggesting we restructure fundamental laws of physics, rather than asking for basic reciprocity in our relationships. Mom leaned forward with the patient expression she used when explaining obvious truths to confused children. Emma, that's just not how families work in the real world. Everyone has their role, their contribution, their place in the family structure. Your place is to be the one who helps others, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's what you're good at, it's what makes you valuable to all of us. Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they confirmed my worst fears about how my family viewed my primary function in their lives. Jessica nodded emphatically, apparently relieved that Mom had articulated what she'd been thinking. Exactly. You're the successful one, Emma. You're the one with the education, and the good job and the financial stability. That comes with certain responsibilities to the rest of us. You can't just decide you don't want those responsibilities anymore, because you're having some kind of quarter-life crisis about feeling appreciated. What if I told you that I'm about to have significantly more financial stability than any of you realized? I asked suddenly, the words coming out, before I'd fully decided to reveal the inheritance. What if I told you that Grandmother Rose left me something that changes everything about our family's financial dynamics? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see their expressions shift from frustrated patience to sharp attention. Dad picked up his legal pad again, but this time he wasn't reading from it. What are you talking about, Emma? Your grandmother's estate was settled years ago. She left us the house, your mother got some jewelry, and there were those small savings bonds for all the grandchildren. There wasn't anything else to inherit. His certainty was absolute, and I realized he genuinely had no idea that Rose had been building wealth in secret for decades. Actually, there was quite a bit more, I said, pulling the trust documents from my purse. Rose established a trust fund in 1995, and she left specific instructions about when and how it should be distributed. I met with her lawyer, Mr. Harrison, earlier this week. I placed the documents on the coffee table between us, and watched as their eyes immediately focused on the official letterhead and legal formatting that suggested serious money. Tyler leaned forward, to get a better look at the papers, his casual disinterest replaced by sharp focus. A trust fund? How much money are we talking about here? And why is this the first time any of us are hearing about it? His questions came rapid fire, and I could see him trying to calculate what this might mean for his own financial situation. Jessica practically lunged for the documents, scanning them quickly with the kind of intense concentration she usually reserved for Madison's report cards or medical bills. Emma, this says the trust is worth. This can't be right. This number has to be a mistake. Her voice had risen to a near squeak, and she kept looking back and forth between the papers and my face, as if trying to determine whether this was an elaborate joke. Mom reached for the documents with trembling hands, her careful composure cracking as she processed what she was seeing. $1.7 million. Rose had $1.7 million. How is that possible? She lived like she was barely getting by. She drove that old car, and wore the same clothes for years, and never traveled anywhere, or bought anything expensive. Her shock was genuine and complete, and I could see her trying to reconcile the grandmother she remembered with the wealthy woman described in the legal documents. Dad took the papers from Mom, and read through them methodically, his expression growing more serious with each page.
When he reached Rose's letter, he read it twice before setting it down carefully and looking directly at me. Emma, this letter says the trust was established specifically for you, not for the family, not to be divided among the grandchildren, but specifically for you alone. Is that correct? That's correct, I confirmed, watching their faces as the full implications began to
sink in. Rose was very specific about her intentions. She wanted me to have financial independence and the freedom to make my own choices without being obligated to solve everyone else's financial problems. I paused, letting them absorb the information before continuing. She also wrote about her observations of our family dynamics over the years and her concerns about the patterns she saw developing. Jessica set down the letter she'd been reading with shaking hands, her face flushed with what looked like a mixture of shock and anger. She had concerns about family dynamics. What kind of concerns? And why didn't she talk to any of us about these supposed problems instead of just secretly judging us and making decisions based on her observations? Her voice was rising again, and I could see her struggling to process both the existence of the money and her exclusion from it. Maybe because she knew exactly how this conversation would go, I said quietly, "Look at your reactions right now. Instead of being happy that someone in the family has received good fortune, you're immediately focused on what this means for you, why you weren't included, and how you can benefit from my inheritance." Their expressions told me everything I needed to know about the accuracy of Rose's predictions. Tyler had been doing mental calculations while the rest of us talked, and now he looked up with barely contained excitement. "Emma, do you understand what this means for the whole family? With this kind of money, you could pay off Mom and Dad's mortgage, help Jessica and me buy a house, set up college funds for Madison and any other kids we might have. This is like winning the lottery, except better because it's not taxed the same way." His enthusiasm was infectious, but it also confirmed every concern Rose had expressed in her letter. "Actually, Tyler, it doesn't mean any of those things," I said firmly. "This inheritance comes with very specific conditions and expectations, all of which were clearly outlined by Rose. This money is intended to give me independence, not to make me a more efficient solution to everyone else's financial needs." My words seemed to hit them like cold water, and I watched their excitement transform into confusion and disappointment. Mom looked at me with an expression of hurt betrayal that was almost painful to witness. "Emma, you're not seriously suggesting that you would keep all this money for yourself while your family struggles with mortgages and car payments and college expenses, are you? That's not the daughter I raised. That's not the kind of person our family produces." Her voice carried the weight of moral authority, the assumption that family obligation automatically superseded individual inheritance rights. "What I'm suggesting," I said carefully, "is that Rose made a deliberate choice about how she wanted her money distributed, and I intend to honor her wishes. She didn't leave this inheritance to the family as a whole, she left it specifically to me, with specific instructions about how it should be used." I could see them struggling to accept that their expectations of shared windfall were not going to be fulfilled. Dad leaned back in his recliner with the expression of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Emma, I understand that legally this money belongs to you, but morally, ethically, there's an obligation to family that goes beyond what any legal document says. Rose was family to all of us, not just to you. Her wealth was built during years when all of us were part of her life, when all of us cared for her and included her in family celebrations and activities." "All of us?" I asked pointedly. "Dad, when was the last time you visited Rose without being asked? When was the last time any of you called her just to check how she was doing, or invited her to dinner, or included her in holiday plans without treating it like an obligation?" My questions hit their mark, and I could see uncomfortable recognition in their faces as they remembered their actual relationship with Rose rather than the idealized version they were constructing to support their claims to her money. Jessica stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back with agitated energy. "This is insane, Emma. You're talking about keeping millions of dollars while your own sister struggles to make rent and your parents worry about retirement. What kind of person does that? What kind of daughter abandons her family the minute she gets enough money to be independent?" Her words were designed to wound, to make me feel guilty for even considering honoring Rose's intentions. "The kind of daughter who was raised by a family that only valued her for what she could provide," I replied, standing up as well. "The kind of daughter who realized that her family's love was conditional on her willingness to be their perpetual solution to financial problems. The kind of daughter who finally understood that she deserved relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-way obligation." Tyler jumped up and positioned himself between Jessica and me, apparently sensing that the conversation was escalating beyond productive discussion. Okay, everyone, calm down. Emma, nobody's saying you have to give away all the money. But surely you can see how helping out family members with some of it would be the right thing to do. We're not talking about funding luxury vacations here. We're talking about basic needs like housing and education and medical care. And who decides what constitutes basic needs? I asked, who determines how much help is appropriate and when and under what circumstances? Who establishes the boundaries around what I'm expected to fund versus what you're expected to manage yourselves? My questions highlighted the practical impossibility of partially sharing the inheritance without creating ongoing expectations and resentments. Mom had been sitting quietly during this exchange, but now she spoke with the kind of quiet authority that had ended arguments throughout my childhood. Emma, I think you need to take some time to really think about what you're saying. This family has loved you and supported you your entire life. We've been there for every milestone, every achievement, every difficult moment. To suggest that our love was somehow conditional or self-serving is not only hurtful, it's completely unfair to the reality of our relationships. Has this family been there for my difficult moments? I challenged. Because I can't think of a single time when I was struggling that any of you noticed without me having to explicitly ask for help. I can't remember anyone checking on my emotional well-being, offering practical support during stressful periods, or even expressing interest in my life beyond its intersection with family needs. My words were harsh but accurate, and I could see them struggling to refute examples they couldn't actually provide. Dad stood up slowly, his age showing in the careful way he moved from his recliner to a standing position. Emma, I think this conversation has gone far enough for tonight. You've given us a lot to think about, and clearly you have some decisions to make about how you want to proceed. But I want you to understand something very clearly. Once you make certain choices, there's no going back. Once you prioritize money over family, once you choose selfishness over loyalty, you can't undo those decisions. His words carried the weight of an ultimatum, and I realized this was the moment Rose had anticipated when she structured the trust with such specific conditions. This was the test she had predicted I would face: the choice between maintaining family relationships by sacrificing my independence, or claiming my inheritance and accepting the consequences of their disappointment and potential rejection. I understand, Dad, I said quietly. And I think Rose understood too, which is why she was so specific about the terms of this inheritance. She knew exactly what choice I would have to make, and she wanted to make sure I had the resources to make it freely. I gathered the trust documents from the coffee table and placed them back in my purse, my hands steady despite the emotional turbulence of the conversation. Jessica turned from the window with tears in her eyes, but her voice was hard when she spoke. So that's it. You're going to choose money over family. You're going to let some legal documents written by a dead woman destroy the relationships that have sustained you your entire life. Her questions were designed to make me feel guilty, but they also revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what the inheritance represented. I'm choosing freedom over obligation, I corrected. I'm choosing relationships based on mutual respect over relationships based on financial dependency. I'm choosing to honor the wishes of someone who understood my situation better than my own family apparently does. My words felt strong and clear, even as my heart ached at the pain I could see in their faces. Tyler shook his head with obvious frustration. Emma, this is a mistake. You're going to regret this decision when you're sitting alone in some expensive apartment, surrounded by money but cut off from the people who actually care about you. Money can't replace faith. And once you've burned these bridges, you won't be able to rebuild them. His warning carried genuine concern mixed with his own disappointment about missing out on financial benefits. Maybe, I acknowledged, but I'd rather risk loneliness than guarantee resentment. I'd rather build new relationships based on who I am rather than maintain old ones based on what I can provide. And I'd rather honor the intentions of someone who gave me this gift freely than betray those intentions to appease people who feel entitled to benefit from her generosity. My response was final, and I could see them beginning to understand that I had made my decision before arriving at their house tonight. Mom walked me to the door in silence, her disappointment radiating from every line of her posture. As I reached for the handle, she placed her hand on my arm gently. Emma, I want you to know that we love you no matter what you decide about this money, but I also want you to understand. That love isn't enough to rebuild trust once it's been broken. Think carefully about what you're willing to lose in order to gain your independence. Her words were softer than the others, but they carried the same underlying message about consequences and choices. I have thought carefully, Mom, I replied. And what I'm willing to lose is the version of myself that said yes to everything without question, that prioritized everyone else's needs over my own well-being, that accepted one-way relationships as normal and healthy. Rose gave me more than money. She gave me permission to value myself enough to expect better. I kissed her cheek gently and walked out into the cool evening air, feeling simultaneously liberated and heartbroken. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of streetlights and emotional processing. I had done what I came to do. I had told them about the inheritance and made clear my intentions regarding Rose's conditions. Their reaction had been exactly what Rose had predicted, exactly what I had feared, and exactly what I had needed to see in order to understand the true nature of our family dynamics. As I unlocked my apartment door and stepped into the quiet space that was entirely mine, I felt the weight of my decision settling around me, like a new piece of clothing that would take time to fit comfortably. I had chosen myself over family expectations, independence over obligation, and uncertain freedom over guaranteed resentment. Whether I would ultimately regret this choice remained to be seen, but for the first time in my adult life, I had made a decision based entirely on my own values and needs, rather than on managing other people's emotions and expectations. The trust documents lay spread across my kitchen table like a map to a future I was only beginning to imagine, and I sat down to read Rose's letter one more time. Her words carried new weight, now that I had experienced firsthand the family reaction she had anticipated. She had given me not just money, but the wisdom to use it wisely, and the courage to accept the consequences of using it according to her intentions rather than their expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as I learned to navigate life as a person of independent means, but tonight I sat in the quiet satisfaction of having honored both Rose's trust and my own integrity. The next morning arrived, with an unusual sense of clarity, as if the emotional storm of the previous evening had cleared away fog I hadn't even realized was obscuring my vision. I woke up naturally at 6:30, without the jarring intrusion of an alarm clock, and for the first time in weeks I didn't immediately reach for my phone to check for overnight messages from family members. The silence felt intentional rather than ominous, and I found myself appreciating the absence of crisis management that usually dominated my mornings. I made coffee with deliberate slowness, grinding the beans by hand and timing the brewing process with the kind of attention I usually reserved for important work presentations. The ritual felt meditative, a way of marking the transition between my old life and whatever came next. As I sat at my kitchen table with the steaming mug, I opened my laptop and began researching the practical steps I would need to take to claim my inheritance properly and begin building the life Rose had envisioned for me. The first call I made was to Patricia Wells, the financial advisor Mr. Harrison had recommended. Her assistant scheduled me for an appointment later that week, but when I explained the general nature of my situation, she offered to speak with me briefly right then. "Sudden wealth can be overwhelming," she said in a warm voice that carried both professionalism and genuine understanding. "The most important thing right now is to avoid making any major decisions while you're still processing the emotional impact. Take time to let this settle before you start making changes." Her advice resonated with me, particularly given the family pressure I was already experiencing to make immediate decisions about sharing the money. I spent the morning reading articles about managing inherited wealth, understanding tax implications, and learning about the psychological challenges that often accompanied sudden financial windfalls. Many of the articles mentioned family conflict as one of the most common complications, and I felt a grim satisfaction in reading that my situation was far from unique. By noon, I had received exactly 0 communications from my family, which was unprecedented following any kind of significant family discussion. Usually Mom would call to smooth over hurt feelings, Dad would send a text with additional thoughts he wanted to share, and Jessica would leave voicemails, ranging from apologetic to accusatory depending on her mood. The silence was both liberating and unsettling, suggesting that our conversation had crossed some kind of line from which there might be no easy return. At 2 o'clock, my phone finally rang with a call from an unknown local number, I answered cautiously, wondering if one of my family members was calling from someone else's phone in an attempt to catch me off guard. Instead, I heard the voice of Detective Patricia Wilson from the Riverside Police Department, and my stomach immediately dropped as I imagined various scenarios that might require police involvement in my family's situation. Thompson, I'm calling regarding a complaint we received this morning about potential financial fraud involving a family trust fund. The complainant alleges that legal documents may have been forged, or that undue influence was used to manipulate an elderly woman's estate planning decisions. Detective Wilson's voice was professional but not unkind, and I could hear the skepticism in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by whatever accusations had been made. I sat down heavily on my couch, my mind racing through the implications of what she was telling me. Detective Wilson, I think I can guess who filed this complaint, and I want to assure you that everything involving my grandmother's trust fund is completely legitimate. I have all the original documents from her attorney, Mr. Harrison, and I can provide any verification you need. My voice was steadier than I felt, and I was grateful for the morning I had spent researching legal processes. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, she replied. Harrison is well respected in this community, and frankly the complaint we received was rather vague and seemed motivated more by disappointment than by genuine concern about fraud. However, we're obligated to investigate any allegations involving potential financial crimes, so I'll need to schedule a time to review your documentation and get your statement about the circumstances. We arranged to meet the following morning at the police station, and Detective Wilson assured me that this was likely to be a straightforward matter that would be resolved quickly once she reviewed the legitimate legal documents. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the fact that my family had apparently decided to involve law enforcement rather than simply accepting my decision to honor Rose's wishes. The realization that they had filed a police complaint felt like a betrayal deeper than anything that had happened during our confrontational dinner conversation. They weren't just disappointed or hurt by my choice, they were actively trying to invalidate the legal foundation of my inheritance, to suggest that Rose had been manipulated, or that the documents were fraudulent. The accusation felt like an attack, not just on me, but on Rose's memory, and her right to distribute her wealth according to her own values and observations. I called Mr. Harrison's office immediately and explained the situation to his secretary, who assured me that he had dealt with similar family disputes before and would be available to provide documentation and testimony if needed. Family money brings out the worst in people sometimes, she said with the weary wisdom of someone who had seen these dramas play out many times. But your grandmother was very thorough in her documentation, and everything she did was completely legal and properly witnessed. That evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. I called a real estate agent I had found online and scheduled appointments to view luxury condominiums in downtown Columbus. If my family was going to treat me like a stranger who had stolen something that belonged to them, then I might as well start building a life that reflected my new circumstances, rather than trying to maintain connections to people who clearly saw me as an obstacle to their financial aspirations. The real estate agent, an energetic woman named Caroline Martinez, was delighted to work with a cash buyer and scheduled showings for 3 different properties that met my criteria for space, location, and security. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself genuinely excited about the prospect of viewing these apartments, of imagining myself living in spaces designed for comfort and beauty, rather than mere functionality. The next morning, I dressed professionally for my meeting with Detective Wilson, choosing a navy blazer and conservative jewelry that would project competence and respectability. The Riverside Police Department was housed in a modern building that looked more like a municipal office than the gritty police stations I had seen in movies, and Detective Wilson turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with an efficient manner and intelligent eyes that missed very little. She reviewed my documentation methodically, asking pointed questions about the timeline of Rose's estate planning, the circumstances under which I had learned about the trust fund, and my understanding of the legal requirements that had governed its distribution. Her questions were thorough but not hostile, and I could see her forming conclusions about the legitimacy of my inheritance as she worked through the paperwork. Thompson, based on what I'm seeing here, this appears to be a completely legitimate inheritance that was properly established and legally distributed, according to your grandmother's documented wishes, she said after reviewing the final document.
The complaint we received suggested that you might have manipulated an elderly woman or forged legal documents, but Mr. Harrison's reputation and the quality of this documentation make those allegations completely implausible. I felt relief flooding through me as she continued her assessment. What we have here is a family dispute about money, which is unfortunately very common, but not a matter for criminal investigation. I'll be closing this case today and recommending that your family members pursue civil remedies if they genuinely believe they have legal grounds to contest the will, though based on what I've seen, I don't think any attorney would take such a case. As I left the police station, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The vindication came from having the legitimacy of my inheritance confirmed by an objective law enforcement professional who had no stake in the family dynamics that had created this conflict. The sadness came from realizing that my family's first response to my financial independence had been to try to criminalize it, to suggest that I was capable of fraud and manipulation rather than simply being the beneficiary of Rose's careful planning. I drove directly from the police station to my first condominium showing, and Caroline met me in the lobby of a gleaming high-rise building that offered panoramic views of downtown Columbus. The apartment she showed me was on the 23rd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. The monthly maintenance fee alone was more than I currently paid in rent, but for the first time in my life, cost was not the primary consideration in a housing decision. The building offers concierge service, a fitness center, and a rooftop terrace. Caroline explained as we toured the spacious rooms. Most residents here are professionals who value privacy and security, so it tends to be a quiet building without a lot of social drama. Her last comment made me wonder if my desire to escape family conflict was more obvious than I had realized, but I appreciated the promise of a living situation where my personal business would remain private. The second apartment we viewed was smaller but had more character, located in a converted warehouse building that had been transformed into luxury loft condominiums. The exposed brick walls and high ceilings gave it an artistic feel that appealed to my creative side, and the building's location in the Short North Arts District would put me within walking distance of galleries, restaurants, and cultural events I had always wanted to attend, but rarely made time for. The third property was a penthouse unit in a boutique building that offered only 8 residences total, ensuring maximum privacy and exclusivity. The apartment itself was stunning, with a private elevator entrance, a wraparound terrace, and amenities that seemed almost absurdly luxurious for someone who had been living in a basic one-bedroom rental just days earlier. Caroline watched my expressions carefully as we toured each space, and I could see her trying to gauge which property resonated most strongly with my vision of my new life. "I'd like to make an offer on the penthouse," I said, as we concluded the final showing. "What's the process for a cash purchase, and how quickly could we close?" Caroline's eyes widened slightly at my decisiveness, but she quickly shifted into professional mode and began explaining the paperwork requirements, inspection processes, and timeline for completing the transaction. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the practical details of claiming my new life, with the same methodical approach I brought to complex work projects. I met with Patricia Wells to establish investment strategies for preserving and growing the trust fund principal, while ensuring steady income for my living expenses. I consulted with a tax attorney to understand the implications of my inheritance and plan for the quarterly payments I would need to make. I researched insurance policies for high net worth individuals and began the process of upgrading my coverage to protect my new assets. Each conversation with these professionals reinforced the reality of my changed circumstances, while also highlighting how much I still had to learn about managing significant wealth responsibly. Patricia Wells walked me through investment portfolios and risk management strategies with patient expertise, helping me understand how to balance growth potential with security concerns. The tax attorney explained structures that could minimize my tax burden while ensuring full compliance with reporting requirements. Most importantly, both professionals emphasized the importance of maintaining boundaries around my wealth and being prepared for ongoing family pressure that was likely to continue long after the initial shock of my inheritance had worn off. "People who feel entitled to your money don't usually give up easily," Patricia warned during one of our meetings. "You'll need to develop strong systems for saying no and protecting yourself from manipulation tactics that may become more sophisticated over time." Her warning proved prescient when I received a certified letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, delivered to my apartment on a Friday afternoon, that had been particularly productive in terms of organizing my new financial life. The letter was from an attorney representing my parents and Jessica, formally notifying me of their intention to contest Rose's will, on grounds of undue influence and lack of mental capacity. They were alleging that I had manipulated an elderly woman into changing her estate plans to benefit me exclusively, and they were demanding that the trust fund be frozen pending a full investigation. I read the letter twice, before the full implications sank in, and then I immediately called Mr. Harrison to discuss how to respond. His secretary put me through to him right away, and I could hear the frustration in his voice as I described the contents of the legal challenge. Emma, I've been expecting something like this ever since you told me about your family's reaction to the inheritance. This is a nuisance lawsuit designed to pressure you into settling rather than fighting, but they've chosen the wrong target if they think we'll be intimidated by baseless allegations. He explained that Rose had been extremely thorough in documenting her mental capacity and her reasons for structuring the trust, as she had, including regular consultations with physicians who had evaluated her cognitive function and multiple witnesses to her estate planning discussions. Your grandmother anticipated exactly this kind of challenge, which is why she insisted on such extensive documentation of her decision-making process. We have medical records, witness statements, and detailed notes from every meeting, where she discussed her intentions. The legal challenge would take months to resolve, even though Mr. Harrison was confident it would ultimately be dismissed, and in the meantime I would have full access to my inheritance, while the case proceeded through the courts. The main impact would be emotional rather than financial, as I dealt with the stress of ongoing litigation, and the knowledge that my family was willing to pursue expensive legal action, rather than accept Rose's legitimate decisions about her own money. That weekend, I signed the paperwork to purchase the penthouse condominium, and began planning the move that would physically separate me from the family dynamics that had shaped my life for 28 years. I hired professional movers to handle the logistics, and began shopping for furniture that reflected my personal taste, rather than my budget constraints. For the first time in my adult life, I could choose items based on quality and aesthetics, rather than price and practicality. The process of furnishing my new home became a form of therapy, a way of defining my identity, separate from family expectations and obligations. I chose a dining table large enough to host dinner parties for friends I hoped to make, artwork that spoke to my personal sense of beauty, rather than coordinating with existing pieces, and bedroom furniture that prioritized comfort and luxury.
Over economy and durability. 2 weeks into the legal challenge, I received an unexpected phone call from Tyler, who had apparently been designated as the family representative for attempting reconciliation. His voice was carefully controlled when he asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss the situation privately, without lawyers or formal legal proceedings complicating our conversation. I agreed to meet him at the Daily Grind, partly out of curiosity about what new approach they had developed, and partly because I missed the family relationships despite everything that had happened. Tyler was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that mixed nervousness with determination. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment we both hesitated awkwardly before settling into the careful politeness of former family members trying to navigate a difficult conversation. "Emma, I want to start by saying that this legal thing wasn't my idea," he began, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup as if seeking warmth. "Jessica and your parents decided to pursue it after consulting with their attorney, but I think it's a mistake that's just going to make everything worse for everyone involved." His disclaimer felt genuine, and I appreciated his attempt to distance himself from the more aggressive tactics the family had chosen. "I'm glad to hear that, Tyler, but I have to ask why you're here if you're not supporting their approach. Are you hoping to convince me to settle the lawsuit, or is this about something else?" I kept my voice neutral, but I was genuinely curious about his motivations for requesting this private meeting. He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest and slightly desperate. "Emma, I'm here because I think our family is about to destroy itself over money, and I don't want that to happen. Madison is asking why you don't come to family dinners anymore, Jessica is stressed to the point where she's not sleeping, and your parents are talking about remortgaging their house to pay legal fees for a lawsuit they probably can't win." His words painted a picture of family chaos that was both predictable and heartbreaking, and I felt a familiar tug of guilt at the thought of Madison being confused by adult conflicts she couldn't understand.
Tyler, I'm sorry that everyone is struggling with this situation, but I didn't create it. I honored Rose's wishes about her own money, and instead of accepting that decision, the family chose to file false police reports and frivolous lawsuits. I'm not the one who escalated this conflict. I know that, he said quickly, and I think deep down they know it too. But Emma, you have to understand their perspective. They're facing financial pressures you don't have to worry about anymore, and seeing you with access to so much money while they struggle with basic expenses is really difficult for them to process. His explanation was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of family dynamics that I had heard from any of them. So what are you proposing? I asked, what would it take for everyone to drop the lawsuit and accept that Rose made her own decisions about her own money? I was curious whether Tyler had any realistic understanding of what reconciliation might require, or if he was simply hoping I would volunteer to share the inheritance to make everyone's discomfort go away. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed me a document that looked like it had been prepared by an attorney. We had a lawyer draw up a proposal for dividing the inheritance in a way that honors Rose's intention to help you while also providing some assistance to the rest of the family. Under this plan, you would keep $1 million for yourself, and the remaining $700,000 would be divided among your parents and Jessica to help with their major expenses. I read through the proposal with growing amazement at their continued misunderstanding of both Rose's intentions and my own position. The document was written as if they were offering me a generous compromise by allowing me to keep the majority of an inheritance that was legally and morally mine alone. They had calculated their fair share based on their own financial needs, rather than on any legitimate claim to Rose's wealth. Tyler, this proposal is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what happened here, I said, sliding the phone back across the table. Rose didn't leave me money that was supposed to be shared with the family. She left me money specifically because she observed how the family treated me and wanted to give me the resources to escape that dynamic. Dividing it according to everyone's financial needs would defeat the entire purpose of her gift. His face fell as he realized I wasn't going to accept their compromise offer, and I could see him struggling to understand why I would choose conflict over family harmony. Emma, I get that Rose wanted to help you, but she also loved the rest of us. Don't you think she would want her money to benefit everyone in the family if it could? Don't you think she would be upset to see us fighting like this over her inheritance? Actually, Tyler, I think Rose anticipated exactly this fight, which is why she structured the trust so specifically and included such detailed explanations of her reasoning, I replied. She knew that giving me financial independence would create family conflict, but she decided that my freedom was more important than everyone else's comfort with the status quo. I'm not going to dishonor her memory by undoing the careful plans she made. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us recognizing that no middle ground existed between his family's expectations and my commitment to honoring Rose's intentions. Finally, Tyler sighed deeply and gathered up his phone and the legal documents. Emma, I hope you understand that this isn't going to end well for anyone. The family is committed to fighting this, and even if they can't win the lawsuit, the relationships are going to be permanently damaged. The relationships were already damaged, Tyler, I said gently. The lawsuit didn't create the problems, it just made them visible. Rose understood that too, which is why she gave me the resources to build new relationships based on who I am rather than what I can provide. My words were final, and I could see him beginning to accept that no negotiation or compromise was possible. As I drove home from that meeting, I felt a profound sense of closure about the family chapter of my life. Tyler's visit had confirmed that they remained focused on accessing the money rather than understanding why Rose had chosen to exclude them from her inheritance. Their proposal had revealed that they saw me as unreasonably selfish rather than appropriately independent, and that they expected me to prioritize their financial comfort over Rose's explicit intentions. 6 months later, the lawsuit was dismissed exactly as Mr. Harrison had predicted, with the judge noting that the family had failed to provide any evidence supporting their allegations of fraud or undue influence. Rose's extensive documentation of her mental capacity and decision-making process had made their case impossible to pursue successfully, and they were ordered to pay court costs as a deterrent against future frivolous litigation. I never heard from any of them again after the legal proceedings ended, which felt both sad and appropriate given the nature of our relationship dynamics. Madison would grow up without knowing her Aunt Emma well, but she would also grow up without witnessing the kind of family manipulation and guilt that had shaped my own childhood.
Jessica and Tyler would continue managing their financial challenges without access to Rose's money, but they would also have the opportunity to develop independence and problem-solving skills they had never been forced to cultivate. The penthouse condominium became more than just a beautiful place to live, it became the foundation for a completely different kind of life. I hosted dinner parties for friends I met through professional networking events and community volunteer activities. I traveled to destinations I had only dreamed about during my years of carefully budgeted vacations. I pursued graduate education in subjects that interested me rather than focusing solely on career advancement and financial security. Most importantly, I built relationships with people who valued my company, my perspectives, and my contributions to their lives rather than my ability to solve their financial problems. These new friendships developed slowly and naturally, based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than family obligation or economic dependence. For the first time in my adult life, I experienced what it felt like to be appreciated for who I was rather than what I could provide. Rose's trust fund continued generating monthly income that exceeded my living expenses, allowing me to support causes I cared about and help people who genuinely needed assistance without creating the kind of dependency relationships that had characterized my family interactions. I established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, donated regularly to organizations supporting financial literacy education, and occasionally helped friends with emergency expenses in ways that felt generous rather than obligatory. The $5 bill that had started this entire transformation remained in my wallet as a reminder of how small acts of self-advocacy could lead to life-changing revelations. Sometimes I would take it out and remember the moment I had decided to stop automatically saying yes to family requests, the moment that had led to discovering both Rose's inheritance and my own capacity for independence. Looking back on the journey from that Sunday family dinner to my new life, I understood that Rose had given me much more than money. She had given me permission to value myself enough to expect reciprocal relationships, courage to honor my own needs alongside others' expectations, and wisdom to recognize the difference between generous love and manipulative obligation. The trust fund was the tool, but the real gift was the freedom to use it according to my own values rather than everyone else's assumptions about family loyalty and financial responsibility. As I sat on my terrace one evening, watching the sunset paint Columbus in shades of gold and amber, I raised a glass of wine in a silent toast to Rose Thompson, the grandmother who had seen me more clearly than my own parents and loved me enough to set me free. Her inheritance had cost me the family I was born into, but it had given me the opportunity to create the life I was meant to live, surrounded by people who appreciated my presence rather than my payments, my character rather than my contributions. My authentic self rather than my automatic compliance. The trust fund would last for decades, generating income and opportunities I was still learning to imagine, but the real transformation had happened in the moment I chose to honor Rose's intentions over family expectations. That choice had required courage I didn't know I possessed, strength I had never been forced to develop, and wisdom I was still acquiring through the daily practice of living according to my own values rather than other people's needs. In the end, Rose's greatest gift wasn't the money itself, but the recognition that I deserved a life built on my own terms, funded by my own choices, and sustained by relationships that enriched rather than depleted my sense of self-worth. She had seen the woman I could become if I was freed from the obligations that had defined my role in the family, and she had given me the resources to become that woman regardless of who supported or opposed the transformation. The legal documents that had formalized my inheritance were filed away in a secure drawer, but the lessons they represented had become the foundation of everything I built afterward. I was no longer the family member who said yes without question, who prioritized everyone else's comfort over my own well-being, who measured my worth by my usefulness to others. I was Emma Thompson, granddaughter of Rose Thompson, independent woman of means, and for the first time in my life, that identity felt both authentic and sustainable. 3 years had passed since that pivotal family meeting, and the woman who sat in the corner booth of Riverside Cafe was barely recognizable as the same person who had once apologized for refusing to buy milk with her own $5. Emma Thompson, now 31, carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of making decisions based on her own values rather than other people's expectations. She wore a tailored navy coat that spoke of quality without ostentation, and her hair fell in soft waves around shoulders that no longer carried the weight of everyone else's problems. The cafe was new to Riverside, a sign of the gradual economic recovery that had brought small businesses and young professionals back to the downtown area that had been struggling for decades.
Emma had chosen this location deliberately, wanting neutral ground for the conversation she was about to have, a place that held no memories of family dinners or childhood disappointments. She checked her watch and took a sip of her lavender latte, a small luxury that had become routine rather than a special treat. At exactly 2 o'clock, the cafe door chimed softly and Tyler Brooks walked in, his eyes scanning the room until they found Emma in her corner booth. He looked older than his 36 years, his face carrying lines of stress that hadn't been there during their last conversation 3 years earlier. His clothing was clean but worn, the outfit of a man who had learned to stretch every dollar and make practical choices about appearance versus necessity. He approached her table with obvious hesitation, and Emma gestured for him to sit across from her in the booth's opposite seat. They studied each other for a moment, two people who had once been family navigating the complex territory of what they had become. The silence wasn't hostile, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened since their last meeting, all the legal battles and hurt feelings and permanent changes that had reshaped their relationship. "Emma, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Tyler said, his voice carrying a humility she had never heard from him before. "I wasn't sure you would want to see me after everything that happened with the lawsuit and the way things ended between you and the family." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup Emma had ordered for him, regular black coffee with 1 sugar, the same way he had always taken it during family gatherings that now felt like they had happened in a different lifetime. "I was curious about what you wanted to discuss," Emma replied honestly. "Your message said it was important and that it wasn't about money, which made me think something significant had changed." She kept her tone neutral but not cold, interested but not vulnerable to manipulation tactics she had learned to recognize and deflect. Tyler nodded slowly, gathering his thoughts before beginning what was clearly a prepared speech. "Emma, a lot has happened in the past 3 years, and I've had time to think about the things you said during our last conversation. About family dynamics, about the way we treated you, about the expectations we had that weren't fair or reasonable." He paused, seeming to struggle with words that didn't come naturally to him. "I've been going to counseling," he continued, "individual therapy to work on some personal issues, but also family counseling with Jessica, to try to understand why our marriage has been struggling so much since everything happened with Rose's inheritance. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was the way our whole family system was built around having you as the person who solved problems and provided resources when things got difficult." Emma listened without interrupting, intrigued by this unexpected turn toward self-reflection from someone who had previously shown little interest in examining family dynamics or personal responsibility. Tyler's willingness to seek professional help and acknowledge problematic patterns suggested a level of growth she hadn't anticipated. "The therapist helped me understand that we had created what she called a parentified child situation, where you were expected to take care of adult responsibilities and emotional needs that should have been managed by the actual adults in the family," Tyler said, using clinical terminology with the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned these concepts recently. "And that when you started setting boundaries and refusing to continue in that role, we reacted like children having a tantrum rather than adults who needed to develop their own coping skills." The acknowledgement was more comprehensive than anything Emma had heard from any family member in the years leading up to their estrangement, and she found herself genuinely surprised by the depth of insight Tyler was demonstrating. It suggested months or possibly years of difficult therapeutic work to reach this level of understanding about family dysfunction. "Tyler, I appreciate you sharing that with me," Emma said carefully. "It sounds like you've been doing important work to understand what happened and why things went wrong, but I have to ask what you're hoping to accomplish by telling me this now. Are you looking for forgiveness, or hoping to rebuild some kind of relationship, or is this more about your own healing process?" Tyler leaned back in the booth, considering her question with obvious seriousness. "Honestly, it's probably all of those things to some degree. But mostly I wanted you to know that I understand now that you were right about the family dynamics, and that the way we reacted to your inheritance was exactly the kind of behavior Rose was trying to protect you from." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Jessica and I separated 6 months ago," he continued, "and Madison has been asking a lot of questions about why she doesn't have an Aunt Emma anymore, why you stopped coming to family events, why everyone gets upset when your name comes up." I realized I couldn't give her honest answers because I'd never really faced the truth about what happened myself. The mention of Madison hit Emma harder than she had expected, and she felt a familiar pang of loss for the relationship with her niece that had become a casualty of the larger family conflict.
Madison would be 11 now, old enough to notice and be affected by the absence of family members who had once been constants in her life. How is Madison handling everything? Emma asked, allowing her concern for her niece to show despite her caution about getting emotionally involved in family drama again. I've thought about her often over the years, wondered how she was doing, whether she understood what had happened. Tyler's expression softened when he talked about his daughter, and Emma could see genuine love and concern in his eyes. She's struggling more than Jessica wants to admit. The divorce has been hard on her, obviously, but she also keeps asking about you specifically, wondering if she did something wrong to make you stop coming around. I think she's old enough now to sense that the adult explanations about you being too busy or living far away don't really explain why you disappeared from her life so completely. Emma felt the familiar tug of guilt that had often accompanied thoughts of Madison over the years, the knowledge that an innocent child had been hurt by adult conflicts she hadn't created or contributed to. But she also remembered Rose's letter, and the importance of maintaining boundaries even when they caused collateral damage to relationships she valued. Tyler, I want you to know that my decision to step back from family relationships wasn't about Madison, and it wasn't meant to hurt her, Emma said quietly. But I also learned that I can't maintain healthy relationships with some family members while trying to shield others from the consequences of those dynamics. It becomes too complicated and ultimately unsustainable. Tyler nodded with the understanding of someone who had learned difficult lessons about family systems and individual boundaries. The therapist explained that to us too, about how you can't really compartmentalize relationships within a family system, especially when there's ongoing conflict and manipulation happening. She said that your decision to withdraw completely was probably the healthiest choice you could have made, even though it created pain for people like Madison who weren't directly involved in the problems. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the complexity of family relationships and the unintended consequences of necessary choices. Emma found herself appreciating Tyler's willingness to engage with these difficult topics honestly, rather than trying to manipulate her emotions or pressure her into resuming family connections. What does Jessica think about you being here today? Emma asked, curious about whether this meeting represented Tyler's individual initiative or some kind of coordinated family outreach effort. Is she supportive of you trying to rebuild a relationship with me, or is this something you're doing on your own? Tyler's expression grew complicated, and Emma could see him wrestling with how much honesty was appropriate in this conversation. Jessica is still pretty angry about the whole situation, he admitted. She feels like you abandoned the family when we needed you most, and she's not ready to consider that our expectations might have been unrealistic or unfair. The marriage counseling sessions where we discussed your situation often ended with her walking out, because she didn't want to examine her role in creating the problems. His honesty was refreshing, even though it confirmed that Jessica remained committed to her narrative of victimization rather than accepting responsibility for her contributions to the family dysfunction. Emma appreciated Tyler's willingness to share this information rather than pretending that everyone in the family was equally committed to growth and reconciliation. So this meeting is really just between us, Emma clarified. You're not here representing the family or trying to negotiate some kind of group reconciliation. You're here because you personally want to acknowledge what happened and maybe explore the possibility of some kind of individual relationship moving forward. That's exactly right, Tyler confirmed. I can't speak for Jessica or your parents, and I'm not asking you to forgive them or resume relationships with them. But I was hoping that maybe you and I could find a way to have some kind of connection, even if it's different from what we had before. And maybe eventually, you might be willing to have some kind of relationship with Madison that doesn't require you to engage with the rest of the family. The possibility of reconnecting with Madison was tempting, but Emma had learned to be cautious about partial reconciliations that might create new opportunities for manipulation or boundary violations. She needed to think carefully about what kind of relationship would be sustainable and healthy for both her and her niece. Tyler, I appreciate your honesty and the work you've been doing to understand what happened between us, Emma said thoughtfully. But I need you to understand. But I need you to understand that any relationship we might have moving forward would have to be built on completely different terms than what we had before. It would need to be based on mutual respect and clear boundaries, with no expectations that I would resume any kind of financial support or problem-solving role. Tyler nodded eagerly, his relief at her openness evident in his expression. I understand that completely, and I want you to know that I'm not looking for financial help or trying to create opportunities for anyone else to ask you for money. The therapy has helped me understand how destructive those patterns were, both for you and for us. We need to learn to solve our own problems instead of looking for someone else to fix them. Emma found herself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship with Tyler, particularly if it might eventually allow her to reconnect with Madison in a healthy way. But she also knew that good intentions and therapeutic insights didn't automatically translate into changed behavior patterns, especially when financial stress and family pressure were involved. I'm willing to explore the possibility of rebuilding our relationship, Emma said carefully, but it would need to happen gradually, with clear agreements about boundaries and expectations. And it would need to be completely separate from any other family relationships or dynamics. Can you commit to keeping our connection private and not sharing details about my life or circumstances with other family members? Tyler agreed immediately, and they spent the next hour discussing practical arrangements for maintaining a limited but potentially meaningful relationship. They exchanged current phone numbers and email addresses, agreed to communicate regularly, but without pressure for frequent contact, and established that any future relationship with Madison would need to be carefully planned and age-appropriate. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Tyler pulled out his phone and showed Emma a recent photo of Madison at her school science fair, proudly displaying a project about renewable energy. The girl in the photo had grown tall and serious, with Emma's dark hair and intelligent eyes that suggested she was developing into a thoughtful young woman despite the chaos of her family situation. She's beautiful, Emma said softly, feeling a rush of love for the niece she had been forced to abandon in order to protect her own well-being. And she looks happy despite everything that's been happening with the divorce and family stress. She is happy mostly. Tyler replied, she's resilient and smart, probably too smart for her own good sometimes. But I think she would be even happier if she knew that her Aunt Emma hadn't forgotten about her and might want to be part of her life again someday. His words carried hope but not pressure, and Emma appreciated his restraint in not pushing for immediate commitment to family reconnection. As they walked out of the cafe together, Emma felt a cautious optimism about the possibility of selective family reconciliation that honored both her need for boundaries and her love for the family members who were willing to respect those boundaries. Tyler's growth and accountability gave her hope that it might be possible to maintain some family connections without sacrificing the independence and self-respect she had fought so hard to establish. The afternoon sun was setting as Emma drove back to Columbus, painting the rural Ohio landscape in shades of gold and amber that reminded her of the evening she had first read Rose's letter and understood the gift her grandmother had given her. 3 years of independence had taught her that freedom came with both privileges and responsibilities, that cutting toxic relationships allowed space for healthier ones to develop, and that honoring her own needs didn't make her selfish but rather made her capable of more authentic generosity. Rose's trust fund continued generating the monthly income that had made Emma's independent life possible, but the real inheritance had been the permission to value herself enough to expect reciprocal relationships and respectful treatment. The money was a tool, but the wisdom to use it appropriately had come through experience, therapy, and the gradual development of confidence in her own judgment and worth. As she pulled into the parking garage of her downtown condominium, Emma reflected on the unexpected gift of Tyler's accountability and the possibility of rebuilding at least some family connections on healthier terms. Not every family estrangement could be resolved through individual growth and therapeutic insight, but Tyler's example suggested that some relationships could be salvaged when both parties were willing to acknowledge past problems and commit to different patterns moving forward. The $5 bill that had started this entire journey still lived in Emma's wallet, now joined by photos and business cards, and reminders of the life she had built through the courage to say no to unreasonable demands, and yes to her own authentic needs. That small act of defiance had led to discoveries and transformations she could never have anticipated, proving that sometimes the most important changes began with the smallest acts of self-advocacy and boundary setting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.